1984, a year where the Cold War still hung like a storm cloud. Thrash metal was spreading through tape trading networks, passed from hand to hand like contraband scripture, and Metallica, 4 kids from California, were chasing something bigger than speed and volume. They wanted meaning. After Kill 'Em All, Metallica had proven their power, but they were restless. James Hetfield later admitted he was starting to get tired of songs about metal and fighting. Cliff Burton, the band's bassist and secret weapon, pushed him to go further. Burton was steeped in music theory, literature, and philosophy. He introduced Hetfield and Ulrich to the idea that metal could carry ideas, not just riffs. Ride the Lightning was recorded at Sweet Silence Studios, a far cry from the gritty American bars where they'd cut their teeth. Producer Flemming Rasmussen remembered Metallica's work ethic vividly. They were serious, focused. They knew what they wanted. Every song on Ride the Lightning began life on the road, on buses, in dressing rooms, during sound checks. The riffs were sharpened like weapons before ever hitting tape. And together, they would form a record that wasn't just louder than Kill 'Em All. It was smarter, heavier, and infinitely more human. Fight Fire with Fire began as a quiet moment on the road. Cliff Burton had been toying with an acoustic piece, something delicate and almost medieval in tone. When the band heard it, they saw potential in the contradiction. Start soft, end in apocalypse. Hetfield later recalled, "That was Cliff's thing. He wanted contrast, light before dark, calm before chaos." The acoustic intro was recorded on a nylon string guitar Cliff had lying around in the studio. It lulled listeners into a false peace, a moment of serenity before detonation. The song itself was written during their 1983 tour, evolving out of Hetfield's growing fascination with lyrics that explored real-world fears. Nuclear war was the specter hanging over the decade. "We were watching all this talk about nukes, about the world ending," Lars Ulrich explained. "So we figured, what's more metal than the end of everything? When the song erupts, it does so with purpose." Lars's drumming became more calculated and less punk, with more precision. James's rhythm guitar was double-tracked to create an almost mechanical effect, and the album tuned slightly sharper than standard to heighten tension. Cliff's bass line, buried beneath the wall of guitars, adds harmonic color to every chord change. Proof of his classical sensibilities, he even suggested shifting key mid-song, giving the track its uneasy, spiraling momentum. Fight Fire with Fire isn't just an opener. It's Metallica declaring that they're no longer writing anthems for teenage rebellion, they're writing prophecies. The title track began with a riff written by Dave Mustaine, a remnant from the band's earliest days. Lyrically, Ride the Lightning marked a huge shift for Hetfield. Instead of another us versus them thrash anthem, he wrote from the perspective of a man awaiting execution, helpless before the system. "It's about being trapped in something you can't control," he said later. "That fear of dying before you've lived." The song's main riff was born during sound checks in late '83. James would noodle on Mustaine's original idea, Cliff would add harmonies, and Lars would change tempos until the riff would breathe. They built the song like engineers designing a machine. During the recording in Copenhagen, Flemming Rasmussen helped them experiment with layering guitars, which was a first for Metallica. Each rhythm part was recorded twice with different amps to thicken the sound. They wanted it to sound huge, Rasmussen said. "You can feel the space and the electricity." The middle section, the haunting dual harmony, came straight from Cliff Burton's notebook. His classical influences led him to suggest a counterpoint line, something he'd first mapped out using musical notation. That section turned the song into an epic rather than a simple thrasher. Ride the Lightning is where Metallica stopped writing songs for their audience and started writing songs for themselves. It's the sound of a band realizing that metal could tell stories and not just make noise. For Whom the Bell Tolls was one of the first songs written for the album, and one of the few that began with the bass. Cliff Burton had been experimenting with distortion pedals, trying to make his bass sound like a guitar. During a jam in early 1983, he stumbled upon the now iconic intro, a doomy, sustained melody that sounded like an army marching through fog. The band built around that line. Lars locked in a mid-tempo groove, and James found a rhythm that felt like tank treads. From there, the structure practically wrote itself. The lyrics came later, inspired by Hemingway's 1940 novel For Whom the Bell Tolls. Hetfield, who'd been reading the book on tour, became obsessed with the idea of death and war, how soldiers become pawns, and how heroism dissolves in blood and repetition. It's not anti-war, he clarified. It's just about how pointless it all is. The track showed Metallica learning to embrace space. Gone were the breakneck tempos of Kill 'Em All. Here, they let the song breathe. That shift was largely Cliff's influence. He wanted the music to feel epic and not just fast. When they entered Sweet Silence Studios, Rasmussen pushed to capture the song's size. Cliff's bass was recorded through both an amp and a direct input to give it depth. You can hear his fingers scraping the strings, the humanity behind the heaviness. The result is one of Metallica's most haunting compositions. It's not the sound of war's glory, it's the sound of its machinery. And that bell, that tolling bell that opens the song, would come to symbolize something greater: Metallica's entry into mythology. Fade to Black began in a motel room. The band had just had all their gear stolen before a show in Boston in January 1984. Amplifiers, guitars, Cliff's pedals, all gone. The theft hit them hard. We felt empty, Hetfield said, like we'd lost everything that made us a band. That night, James started strumming an acoustic guitar someone lent him, and out came the skeleton of Fade to Black. It was slow, somber, and entirely unlike anything Metallica had written before. Lars initially wasn't sure what to make of it, but Cliff saw its potential immediately. The lyrics came from a dark place. James was struggling with exhaustion and depression from the road. The words, "I have lost the will to live," weren't metaphorical bravado. They were a cry for help disguised as a melody. Musically, the song pushed Metallica into uncharted territory. It was the first to feature an acoustic intro recorded with multiple layers, each one slightly detuned to give it a shimmering, mournful quality. Rasmussen suggested blending the acoustic with a clean electric to bridge the two worlds. When the distortion finally arrives, it's like anger breaking through grief. Kirk Hammett's solos, heavily inspired by David Gilmour's phrasing in Pink Floyd, were tracked over several takes, each one more emotional than technical. His final outro solo was done in one continuous take. Fade to Black caused controversy when released. Some fans accused Metallica of going soft, but the band didn't care. "We weren't trying to be balladeers," Lars said. "We were just trying to be real." The song marked a turning point, not only in Metallica's career, but in metal itself. Proved that vulnerability could be heavy, that despair could be art. And in that moment of darkness, Metallica found light. Trapped Under Ice was born in one of Metallica's coldest chapters. Literally, the riff ideas came together during the band's time writing in a freezing garage in upstate New York. Before heading to Denmark, the environment shaped the sound, sharp, anxious, and biting. The initial skeleton came from leftover material James and Lars had written during Kill 'Em All, a riff that had never found a home until now. In 1984, they rediscovered it, stripped it down, and rebuilt it with new speed and precision. "We just wanted something that hit like panic," Lars said, "something that sounded like you couldn't breathe." The title and theme, claustrophobia and helplessness, fit perfectly with the band's state of mind at the time. The pressure pressure of following up Kill 'Em All, the isolation of Denmark, and the suffocating grind of touring all crept into the writing. Cliff contributed some harmonic ideas during the pre-chorus, giving it an unexpected melodic lift amid the chaos. He was also responsible for the tension in the arrangement, suggesting abrupt stops between sections to create a feeling of being trapped rhythmically. Lyrically, James reached for metaphor rather than realism. A man frozen in ice, screaming but unheard. It's not literal, he explained later. It's just that feeling of no one hearing you. And that's worse than death. Trapped Under Ice may not be the album's philosophical centerpiece, but it's crucial to its emotional texture. It captures the human panic that lives beneath all of Ride the Lightning's grand themes, the raw animal instinct to survive. The song's recording was quick, maybe too quick. The band later admitted they rushed it to keep the album's energy flowing, but in that urgency lies authenticity. It sounds exactly like what it is, four musicians fighting the clock and clawing for air. Escape is the black sheep of Ride the Lightning. Even the band has said as much. James Hetfield once joked, "That's the song we wrote when someone said we needed a radio single, and we learned to never listen to anyone again." It's the only Metallica track written from the top down. Concept first, riff second. The record label suggested something more accessible. Hetfield and Ulrich, reluctant but curious, decided to try it. They borrowed the song's main riff from a jam they'd been playing backstage, tightening it into a verse-chorus structure that could theoretically work for radio. But even in that framework, they couldn't help but rebel. The lyrics see them try to bring the hammer down, "No damn chains can hold me to the ground," were Hetfield's passive-aggressive response to being told what to write. It became a song about resisting conformity, even while existing as their most conventional track. The band recorded Escape late in the Ride the Lightning sessions, almost as an afterthought. Rasmussen recalled, "They didn't want to do it, James especially, but once we hit record, they attacked it. Musically, it's still fierce. The main riff is catchy but tense, and the chorus hits with a strangely defiant energy. Cliff Burton's melodic fills ingest sophistication into an otherwise straightforward rocker, and Kirk's solo, improvised in a single take, gives the song its most authentic moment." When Metallica later played Ride the Lightning in full at festivals decades later, Escape made its live debut. Hetfield introduced it with a smirk. "This one's called The Song We Never Play." Even its failure to fit in proved something vital, that Metallica couldn't be boxed in. They were already breaking out of thrash's cage, even if it took a misfit track to prove it. Creeping Death began in a jam session in the Bay Area, months before the band flew to Denmark. The foundation came from a riff Kirk Hammett had written years earlier while still in Exodus. When Kirk joined Metallica, he brought that riff with him, and the rest of the band transformed it into something biblical. The inspiration hit while the band watched the Ten Commandments on television during a writing break. As the story of the Egyptian plagues played out on screen, Hetfield muttered, "Creeping Death, that'd make a good song." By the next rehearsal, the lyrics started forming. The narrative, told from the perspective of the Angel of Death during the final plague, captured Metallica's new lyrical identity, mythic, symbolic, and fearless. No longer writing about beer or thrashing, they were now writing about God's wrath. Cliff's musical sense elevated the track to near orchestral levels. He crafted the harmonic structure beneath the verses, suggesting modal shifts to make the riffs sound ancient and foreboding. His influence also shaped the iconic breakdown, the die, die, die chant section. The band wrote that part in rehearsal purely for audience participation. They knew they couldn't have imagined it would become one of the most unifying chants in metal history. Recording the song was a joy compared to the stress of the other tracks. Lars called it the most fun song to play on the whole record. Rasmussen captured their energy by letting them perform most of it live in the studio, only layering rhythm guitars afterward for thickness. Creeping Death became the defining anthem of Ride the Lightning and embodied every theme on the record: mortality, power, vengeance, and fate, but wrapped in an unforgettable groove. Even now, nearly 4 decades later, it remains one of Metallica's most powerful live rituals. The Call of Cthulhu, spelled wrong intentionally, is the record's final track, and its spiritual core, it's an instrumental but one that speaks volumes. The song's origins go back to Cliff Burton's fascination with H.P. Lovecraft. He had been reading The Shadow over Innsmouth and The Call of Cthulhu, and he became obsessed with the idea of cosmic dread, forces beyond human control. He brought that to the band as a concept. What if we wrote something that sounded like the ocean swallowing the world? Metallica had dabbled in instrumentals before, see Anesthesia Pulling Teeth, but this was something different. Cliff and Kirk built the main melodic motif together. 2 guitars playing harmonized lines inspired by classical composers. Much of the song was written during late-night jam sessions. Lars and James treated it like a film score, each section representing a new chapter in an unfolding story. Recording Cthulhu was almost meditative. Fleming Rasmussen dimmed the studio lights and let them play for hours. They weren't thinking about headbanging, he recalled. They were thinking about mood. The clean guitars were layered up to 6 times, each one slightly offset to create an oceanic sound. The result is a masterpiece of atmosphere, wordless yet overwhelming. You can feel Cliff Burton's soul in every measure, his classical training and cosmic imagination guiding the others towards something beyond metal itself. When the final note fades, it doesn't resolve. It drifts, like a question unanswered, because that's what Ride the Lightning is at its core, a confrontation with the unknown. When Ride the Lightning hit shelves in July 1984, it shocked the metal world. Some fans were confused by the acoustic guitars and slower tempos. Others realized instantly that Metallica had transcended thrash. This was the record that proved that intelligence and intensity could coexist. It was the sound of 4 musicians daring to grow. In just one album, they evolved from brawlers to architects. Cliff Burton's theoretical mind gave them structure, Hetfield's maturing lyricism gave them purpose, and Lars's precision turned chaos into craftwork, and Kirk's melodic sensibility gave them a voice. Critics did not know how to categorize it. Too thoughtful for pure thrash, too aggressive for mainstream rock. But the underground understood. Metallica had created something new, thinking man's metal. The themes of fate, fear, control, and mortality all converge here. Ride the Lightning wasn't just about dying, it was about realizing you are alive in a world that could end at any moment. And as the final echoes of Call of Cthulhu fade into silence, Metallica stood at the threshold of greatness. 1 year later, they would release Master of Puppets, an album that would perfect everything Ride the Lightning began. But none of it would have existed without this one. The record where Metallica learned that darkness could be beautiful, that heaviness could be intelligent, and even the loudest band in the world could still listen. Because in the end, Ride the Lightning isn't about death, it's about defiance. Outstanding in front of the inevitable and screaming anyway.